Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me today. I've got something really special for you. I thought we could travel back in time to the Iron Age, 400 BC or thereabouts, to explore the origins of what are called bog people, mummified bodies that have been dug up in Denmark in the past 100 years or so. Nobody knows why they were in the bog in the first place, and often how they died, but they found something like 500 cadavers over the years, and the reason is because peat, the natural substance of the bog, which is a kind of decomposed vegetable matter that becomes like soil, it is particularly acidic. And of course, Denmark is cold, and the Jutland Peninsula, where the bodies have been found, is very, very cold. And so that preserves the bodies as well. There's one that people are particularly interested in. He's called Tolland Man. There's a picture of him when he was found in the 1950s, I think. He was naked in the fetal position, about 7 feet down, and he had a noose around his neck. It was a particular mystery. Why was he buried? Why was he hanged? Nobody actually knows, but he was dug up in the 1950s, and technology wasn't so great at the time. And so although the peat in the bog had preserved him for the longest time, the moment he was extracted, the bones began to deteriorate. So now what we're left with is the head, the mummified head. That's the real thing. It has a cap on. That's his real cap. But the bones had to be replaced with plastic ones, I think, for display purposes, because they didn't survive. But I thought it would be so interesting to go in, or at least to try to. I had no guarantees of this, but to go into his energy based on that mummified head, and to see if I could get anything from it, any clues as to how he died. And when I did, it was dark, immediately, completely dark, in an almost unearthly way. Actually, I couldn't really see a thing. I emerged from some dip in the ground, a hollow, a trench, or something, where I'd been hiding, possibly, or waiting until nighttime or something. But I emerged from that very furtively. A part of me felt slightly fearful, but that was counterbalanced, I thought, by exhilaration. There was danger, but I sort of enjoyed the danger. I wasn't absolutely sure why at the time. But there was some kind of light, or lights, candles, maybe. Not very bright at all, but enough to cast a bit of a shadow. And I was so desperate not to be seen in that, albeit very, very dim light. And ahead of me, there was, to me, it looked like a trimmed hedge. I'm not so sure that in the Iron Age they had trimmed hedges in Denmark, but maybe they did. Maybe. But there was something. It wasn't a wall. It was something made of bushes or whatever. And it was a blockage. I went around the hedge and crept, really sneakily crept, along the length of this hedge. I'm going to call it a hedge. At which point I really got into darkness. Sometimes you actually can't see anything. Everything around you is kind of hemmed in and you can't make out anything. There was a bit of that, and I thought that was the end of it. I looked around, I couldn't see anything. I thought, oh, well, that's the end of that, for whatever reason. But I was moving. I had a sense of movement forward. And eventually I emerged from this area of complete darkness onto what I thought looked like a country lane. But in my terms, it was like a path of some kind that was defined. Like, this is where traffic went, carts went, or horses, or whatever. It was defined with hedges on either side. That was very clear. It was defined. And over here, behind one of the hedges, was a structure that seemed well kept, like a house that had candles in the window. So that may all tie in with the lights I saw. Maybe I was in the grounds of that house, although we are still talking 400 BC, so I'm sure it's not very, very well ordered, this. But the structure didn't seem tumble down. It didn't seem decrepit or anything. It seemed like a home with crude lights. And I was anxious not to be seen by anybody around this house. So I crept along this lane, or along this path, with the hedges either side. And at some point, I came to the end of the hedge, and there was another structure there. I have no idea what that structure was, but there was another structure there, and a little offshoot of the lane, a little tributary down here, and something was coming. Something was coming that had a light on it. Obviously not electric or even maybe oil, but there was a light of some kind, and something or somebody was coming. And I went down this little lane, and I pressed against this structure, whatever it was, and waited until whatever, went by, which it did. Then I emerged and kept on walking, still very furtively, and hurried on my way. I got a feeling that I had a kind of destination. I knew where I was going. I had to get back to where I lived, I suppose, or whatever. But it was some distance away, and I had to walk there. So I carried on up the lane with these hedges either side, and as I did so, I had this feeling of something coming towards me. Symbolically, in terms of just what it felt like, it was almost like lava from a volcano. It moves, it just comes down towards you, and you've got to run away because it's heading straight for you. It felt a bit like that. Only it was either people. I thought a mob, maybe. It could be a mob of people. Or some animals or something was also possible. It blocked the lane, was the point. It blocked the lane and was moving fairly fast. So I turned around and started to run this way, but I simply couldn't run fast enough. And whatever this was, and I simply have no idea, but whatever it was, it overtook me and crushed me, and that was the end of me. It's possible that sense of being consumed and asphyxiated was something to do with sinking in the bog, but that doesn't explain why I would have a noose around my neck. I concluded, but obviously I don't know, I concluded that it was people. It was like mobs of people with torches or something that came down, caught me, ran faster than I did, caught me, and that I'd been some kind of villain, crook, criminal, in those tribal terms. But I also got a feeling that it wasn't about administering justice according to any kind of legal system. I think I was caught, and I resigned myself to the fact that I had been caught, nabbed, overtaken by the people, and I was simply hanged for whatever I'd done. I mean, as an absolute outside shot, it could be that it was the peat bog asphyxiating me, somebody threw a rope, and since the only bit of me exposed was my head, I, like a fool, tied it around my neck, thinking they could pull me out, and actually they killed me, and I just carried on sinking. That's possible too. But if it was a ritualistic hanging as punishment for something, some activity, something I'd done, and I'd been on the run the whole time, I was hiding in the trench and behind the hedges and stuff, if that's all the case, then the hanging was punishment. but not in any kind of official legal way, just locals doing this to somebody they've been trying to catch. I did have a residual feeling of my body being arranged inside a blanket or something, or whatever they had. I have no idea what they had, but like a sheet or a blanket or something, and carried to the bog and thrown in, which would perhaps explain the fetal position, maybe, and the rope was still there. That is all I got. But it was so breathlessly dramatic, and I felt those butterflies. Actually, they weren't in my stomach, they were lower down. It's like, oh my God, oh my God. It was real fear, the fear you feel in your kidneys and stuff. It's like, oh my God, oh my God. But at the same time, I was exhilarated. It's like, oh, I can escape. I can get away from this. They won't catch me. As if I was a prisoner on the run, or somebody who'd done bad deeds, and I knew the townsfolk were out to get me. As I said earlier, there were about, so far, 500 people found in these bogs in Jutland. And I thought, well, why don't I just try another one? Find another one and go into the energy of that and see whether it ties in with the Tolland man. So I found, now bear in mind, this is a little gruesome, this picture, because this is a woman from, I think, 200 BC. They do carbon dating on these things, and they try their best to get a year for it. I think this was like 200 BC, and she's referred to as the Huldra Mose woman. She was dug up in the 19th century in the same kind of area. The difference was that she was fully clothed, and they still have her clothes. But she, too, had a rope of some kind around her neck. And people are very curious what happened to her. So I thought I'd go into her energy from this picture and see what I got. I wasn't really expecting very much, actually. I thought I was quite lucky with the other guy. But I went into her energy. And when I did, I was fighting like an alley cat. I was struggling and I was lashing out. It was wild. It was an immediate explosion of energy. And I had this rope thing around my neck, whatever it was. Somebody was behind me holding this. It was like a leash. It's like they had a wild junkyard dog on a leash to stop it attacking people. But I was still trying to attack people because there were men coming at me. I thought 3, and then the 4th one holding me on the leash. But I wasn't attacking them. I was desperately trying to defend myself, given that I was completely impaired and held back by this other guy with the leash. I felt at some point something hit me in the side here, just above the hip, as though I'd been tased. But some weapon or tool, because I felt a stinging, like a burning here, like a poker, maybe? A hot poker? Something like that. I don't know. It didn't necessarily be hot, but it definitely stung me just above my hip here, in my side. And this made me even more panicky and wilder. I'm not absolutely sure that this woman was completely mentally stable. It could be that they were trying to hold down somebody who was, in their perspective, crazy. And I fell to my knees, or down to one knee. And then there came this moment of decision with the men around me, because now I was on one knee or down on both knees. They had to make a spontaneous decision whether to just end it, or I guess to let me go, or to take me somewhere or whatever. And the decision was made to just keep on pulling the leash and to choke me. And then maybe there were attacks as well at the same time. It was a joint attack. It wasn't sexual. It was simply trying to subdue a madwoman in their eyes, something like that. And they made a decision to just end it there. let's avoid complication, let's just end it here. And for right or wrong, in their eyes, they went ahead with their decision, they followed through, and I choked to death at that point. And I think the reason I'm in my clothes is because whatever tribal laws they had at that time against murder, I'm pretty sure murder was still a thing all the way back then, but whatever tribal rules they had would have these guys in trouble if they were found with a dead body. So I think what they did was they wrapped her up in blankets or clothes or whatever she had, and they took her to the bog and simply disposed of the body. It was the best way. Nobody would ever go in there and find it. And nobody would miss her. And they wouldn't be in trouble for doing what they did. And this was what they did. They took all her clothes and everything, which are still well preserved, actually, because of the peat, and they're in museums and stuff. And she was found with her clothes intact, although the body was very heavily mummified. But they just put her in the bog and went away, and nobody would be any the wiser. That's what that felt like. And with the Tolland man, it was again about disposing of the body, I thought. It's almost as if somebody carried it in a sheet or blanket to the bog and threw it in, or dug a hole and put it in, or something like that. And he vanished. But they both had these cords around their neck, but for very different reasons. The Tolland man was a criminal. The local townsfolk needed to get rid of or punish, but they did it without real reference to any laws. They just did it on spec. And the Huldremos woman, she was out of control in some way, and so frightened that in order to subdue her, they had to kill her, I think, and then, in a similar way, dispose of the body, using possibly her clothes as the carrying device, like a makeshift stretcher, to take her to the bog and dispose of her. Alrighty, thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.